My doctor's receptionist stopped me in the parking lot last Thursday. She looked both ways before she spoke, like she was about to tell me something she shouldn't. Margaret, she said, keeping her voice low, do you know that someone comes into your building every single month on the day of your appointment? I live 2 floors above you. I've seen it 3 times now. I stood there in the cold with my car keys in my hand and didn't know what to say. I am 68 years old. I have lived alone in my apartment at Birchwood Commons since my husband George passed 4 years ago. It is a quiet building on the east side of Columbus, Ohio, 3 floors, 12 units, mostly retirees, and 1 young couple on the 2nd floor who keep to themselves. I know my neighbors. I know the sounds of the hallways. I know when something is off, and something had been off for months. It started small. The way things that are wrong always start so small, you convince yourself you imagined it. A lamp moved 2 inches to the left. A drawer in the kitchen not quite closed all the way. My reading glasses on the bathroom counter instead of on my nightstand where I always leave them. I mentioned it once to my son David when he called on a Sunday. He laughed gently and said, "Mom, you're probably just forgetting where you put things. It happens." He said it kindly. That was the thing. He always said everything kindly. David is 41. He lives about 20 minutes away in Westerville with his wife Karen and their 2 kids, my grandchildren Tyler and Becca. He calls every Sunday without fail and visits on the 1st Saturday of every month, sometimes with the family, sometimes alone. Karen visits separately on occasion, usually to drop off something the kids made at school or to check in, she says. She is polite, always polite, the kind of polite that never quite reaches the eyes. I had always told myself I was imagining that last part too. My monthly appointment at Dr. Heller's office is always the 2nd Thursday of the month at 10 in the morning. It takes about 2.5 hours total, the drive there, the wait, the appointment, the drive back. I have kept this same schedule for 3 years. Everyone in my life knows about it. It is, I suppose, the most predictable thing about me. After the receptionist, her name is Patricia, and I have known her for years, said what she said in that parking lot, I went home and sat at my kitchen table for a long time, without turning on any lights. I thought about the lamp. I thought about the drawer. I thought about something else. Something I had pushed to the back of my mind because it made me feel foolish and old. 3 months ago, I noticed my checking account was lower than it should have been. Not by a dramatic amount. $80 one month, then $120 the next. I had called the bank, and they told me the withdrawals were made at an ATM on Morse Road using my card. I told them I had not made those withdrawals. They flagged it as potential fraud, issued me a new card, and said they would investigate. Nothing more came of it. I had a new card. I assumed the problem was solved. I went to my bedroom and opened the small box on my dresser where I keep important things. My spare house key, a copy of my will, George's watch. The spare key was there. It looked undisturbed, but a key can be copied and returned in the same afternoon if someone knows what they're doing. I had seen that on a news segment once and thought, how terrible for whoever that happened to. I had never thought about it happening to me. The next morning, I called my neighbor, Mr. Patterson on the 2nd floor. Retired postal worker, sharp as a tack. 73 years old, and not a thing gets past him. I asked him carefully if he had ever noticed anything unusual on my floor when I was out. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't want to say anything, he said, because I wasn't sure. But yes, I've seen Karen's car in the lot on days you aren't home. A few times over the past several months. I assumed David had sent her to pick something up. I thanked him and hung up. I sat with that information for the rest of the morning. Karen, my daughter-in-law, the woman who brought my grandchildren to visit, who called me on my birthday, who had once helped me rearrange my living room furniture after I threw out my back. Karen, who knew my schedule as well as anyone, because I had told her and David a dozen times, 2nd Thursday of every month, Same as always. I want to be clear about something. I did not cry. I am not saying that to sound strong. I am saying it because I remember being surprised by it sitting there at my kitchen table in the morning light and feeling something colder and more clarifying than grief. I had been dismissed. I had been made to feel like a forgetful old woman. I had been patted on the head by my own son and sent back to my confusion. And the whole time, someone with a key to my home had been walking through my rooms. I was not confused. I was being robbed. That afternoon, I drove to the electronics store on Sawmill Road and asked the young man behind the counter to show me the smallest, most discreet home security camera they sold. He showed me something about the size of a deck of cards, battery-powered, with 2 weeks of recording capacity and motion-activated detection. It connected to an app on my phone. He said I could hide it anywhere with a clear line of sight to my front door. I paid cash. That evening, I set it up behind the row of George's old books on the shelf beside the entryway. Crime novels. Mostly, he had loved them. There was something fitting about that. I angled the lens toward the door, tested the app until I could see a clear image on my phone. And then I did something I had not originally planned to do. I called Dr. Heller's office and rescheduled my appointment. I told Patricia I wasn't feeling well. She understood. She is a kind woman, and I felt a small pang of guilt for lying to her. But I needed one Thursday unaccounted for. I needed to see if the pattern held when no one knew I had changed my plans. The following Thursday morning, I made a show of leaving. I took my purse, my coat, started my car in the lot, and drove away. Then I parked 2 streets over at the library, walked back through the side entrance of the building that faces the alley, and let myself into the apartment of my neighbor Ruth on the ground floor, who had agreed, without asking many questions, to let me sit quietly in her living room for the morning. Ruth is 80 and has seen enough of the world that she simply handed me a cup of coffee and turned on her television. I sat there with my phone in my hands and watched the app. For the first 40 minutes, nothing happened. I drank my coffee and watched a game show with Ruth and almost started to feel foolish. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe it had all been coincidence and my own paranoid imagination, and David had been right all along that I was forgetting things. Then at 10:47, motion. The camera picked up my front door opening. I watched on my small screen as Karen walked in. She was wearing a jacket I had seen before, dark green, and she moved with the ease of someone who had done this many times. She did not look around, nervously. She did not hesitate. She walked straight to my bedroom. She was in there for 11 minutes. Then she went to the kitchen, then back to the bedroom. Then she left, pulling the door closed behind her with a quiet, practiced click. I did not go upstairs. I sat in Ruth's armchair with my hands very still in my lap, and I watched the video 3 times. Then I called my bank. It took most of that day and 2 more phone calls over the following week to piece together what had happened. The fraud investigator assigned to my account was a patient woman named Miss Torres, and she walked me through everything carefully. What she found was worse than I had thought. Karen had not simply copied my old card key. She had gone further. In my bedroom, in the small accordion file where I keep financial documents, there were copies of my account statements going back over a year. Someone, and this had apparently happened on an earlier visit, had photographed those documents and used the information to access my online banking portal, setting up a secondary linked account that allowed small, irregular transfers to be pulled out without triggering automatic fraud alerts. Amounts under $200, spaced out irregularly. Miss Torres said it was not unsophisticated. Whoever had done it had known what they were doing or had been advised by someone who did. The total over 14 months came to just over $4,000. $4,000 that I had not noticed because the amounts were always small, and I am not. I will admit it plainly. Someone who checks her bank statements every week. George always handled the finances. After he passed, I did my best, but I was not diligent the way I should have been. I had trusted that things were fine because nothing had ever been terribly wrong before. I gave Miss Torres the camera footage and the dates. She gave me the name of a detective at the Columbus Police Department who handled financial crimes. His name was Detective Okafor, and he had a steady, unhurried way of talking that made me feel like I was not wasting his time. I had not told David anything yet. That was the hardest part. Not the anger, not the embarrassment, not even the grief of it, but sitting through 2 Sunday phone calls with my son while knowing what I knew, listening to him ask how I was feeling and whether I needed anything, and saying I was fine. Everything was fine. I am not a person who lies easily. Those 2 weeks aged me in a way I haven't quite recovered from. Detective Okafor asked me to wait. He said rushing it would give her time to move money or destroy evidence. He needed to subpoena the linked account records and trace where the transfers had gone. He said I was doing the right thing by not confronting her yet, and I held on to that every day like a rope. During those weeks, I also learned something I had not known. I found out through a conversation with my friend Carol, who knows everyone and everything in a 3-county radius, that Karen had recently gotten involved in a side business with a woman from her gym, some kind of online resale operation buying and flipping things. Carol said she had heard it wasn't going particularly well, that there were debts involved. I filed that away and said nothing. 6 weeks after I first watched that video on my phone, Detective Okafor called me on a Tuesday afternoon. The linked account traced to a joint account held by Karen and a woman named Sandra. Sandra had a prior record, a dismissed fraud charge from 6 years ago in Michigan. The transfers had been used to pay vendor invoices for their resale business. He had enough for an arrest warrant. He asked me one more time if I wanted to call my son before they moved forward. I said yes. I said I needed to be the one to tell him. I called David that same evening. I had written down what I wanted to say because I knew if I didn't have it in front of me, I would either cry or soften it into something unrecognizable. I read it almost word for word. I told him about Patricia in the parking lot. I told him about Mr. Patterson. I told him about the camera and what it had shown. I told him about Miss Torres and the $4,000 and the linked account and Sandra. He did not say anything for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than I had ever heard it, flattened out. He said, "Mom, are you sure?" I said, "David, I have it on video." Another silence. Then he said he needed to call me back. I told him the police would be moving forward regardless. I told him I loved him and I was sorry. He hung up. I told him that is proving. I told him the police would be moving. I sat in my kitchen and looked at George's photograph on the counter. He would have known what to say. He always knew what to say. I just sat there in the quiet of the apartment that had been walked through and gone through, and I let myself cry finally. Not for the money, not even really for the betrayal, but for David's voice on the phone, sounding like a man whose floor had just dropped out from under him. Karen was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Sandra was arrested the same day. I was not there for it. Detective Okafor called me afterward and told me it had gone smoothly. Karen had not resisted. She had apparently sat down on her front steps and waited. David called me that night. He came over the next day, and we sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours and talked. It was one of the hardest conversations I have ever had, and also, in some strange way, one of the most honest. He told me he had known things were not right with their finances. He had not known what she was doing, but he had seen her stress and had not asked enough questions. He said that, and then he put his head in his hands and did not say anything for a while. I told him what I had told Patricia months earlier, without knowing why I was saying it, that I had always believed. The people who love us are capable of the worst failures, not in spite of that love, but sometimes tangled up with 34 it of you. He looked up at me and said, "When did you get so wise, Mom?" And I told him I had been paying attention for 68 years, and it adds up eventually. The trial was 4 months later. Karen's attorney tried to frame it as a desperate situation. Financial stress, a momentary lapse that became a habit. The judge, a woman in her 60s who looked like she had heard every version of this particular story, did not appear moved. Karen pleaded guilty. Sandra pleaded guilty. The judge sentenced each of them to 18 months of probation and ordered full restitution, every dollar, with interest, repaid to me in monthly installments. She also issued a no-contact order that covered my residence and my person. Karen spoke briefly before sentencing. She said she was sorry. She looked at me when she said it. I looked back. I did not nod or smile or give her anything, not because I am a hard woman, but because sorry, at that point, was the least expensive thing she could offer me. David filed for divorce 2 weeks after the sentencing. I did not encourage him to, and I did not discourage him. He is my son, and I will support him through whatever he decides. He has the children on weekdays and Karen has them on weekends, and they are adjusting the way children do by absorbing everything and showing you what they've absorbed 6 months later in small, unexpected ways. Tyler drew a picture of me at school and wrote underneath it, in 7-year-old handwriting, "My grandma Margaret is very brave." His teacher sent it home in a plastic sleeve. I have it on my refrigerator now. Becca, who is 10, asked me last month if I had really put a hidden camera in my apartment. I said yes. She thought about that for a moment, and then said it was very smart. I told her it was also a little sad that it had been necessary. She nodded like she understood that, which surprised me. But then Becca has always been an old soul. Patricia, my doctor's receptionist, does not entirely know what she set in motion that morning in the parking lot. I brought her a box of chocolates and told her that her instinct had mattered, that speaking up had mattered. She seemed embarrassed. She said she had almost not said anything because she wasn't sure it was her place. I told her it is always a person's place to tell someone the truth about their own life. Mr. Patterson saw me in the hallway last week and asked how everything was going. He said he was glad, then cleared his throat and said he'd been meaning to mention. And did I know that a young man in a red truck had been parking in the visitor lot every few days, right around the time the Hendersons in 2B were both at work? I told him he should probably write down the license plate just in case. He nodded and went back to his apartment, looking pleased with himself. I am not the same person I was before all of this. I don't mean that in a wounded way. I mean that something in me recalibrated the part that had always found it easier to doubt myself than to trust my own instincts. The moved lamp, the closed drawer, the numbers in my account that didn't quite add up. I had noticed all of it and talked myself out of every single signal. I had been trained by a lifetime of being told that women of a certain age misplace things, forget things, imagine things. I do not imagine things. I notice them. There is a very significant difference, and I wish I had understood it sooner. I have a standing Thursday appointment at Dr. Heller's office, and I keep it without rescheduling now. I take the same route. I am predictable in all the ways I always was. But before I leave each morning, I check the app on my phone and make sure the camera behind George's books has a full battery. I don't expect to ever need the footage again, but I like knowing it's there. Ask you, I like the feeling of being a woman who pays attention and acts on what she sees and does not apologize for either one. George would have appreciated that, I think. He always did love a good mystery, the kind where the answer was hiding in plain sight the whole time, waiting for someone patient enough to look.